Thanks for joining us today for the IFMA Food Service Landscape Update webinar. As you guys may know, this landscape is updated twice a year, with the most recent update happening with a release at the IFMA Marketing and Sales Leaders Forum event in early August. So because of the recent update, we wanted to share some of these updates with our membership. So today I would like to welcome Julie Hoffmeyer from the NPD Group, Brian Darr, and Katie Chapuis from Data Central, and they will be sharing some of the headwinds and tailwinds and some of the reasoning behind some of the shifts that have occurred since our last update. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Julie Hoffmeyer to get us started.
Thanks, Julie. Like Julie said, my name is Julie Hoffmeyer with the NPD Group, and I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes today focusing on NPD's outlook for the commercial restaurant industry for the coming year. And then I'm going to turn it over to Brian, who's going to walk you through the outlook for food service at retail, and Katie, who will walk you through the outlook for the on-site channels. So with regards to the food service industry in total, our prognosis for the away-from-home industry is moderate or average for the coming year. While there are many positive signs that we're seeing when it relates to the economy, including declining unemployment and wage increases, both of which are providing consumers with more cash in their wallets that they can be clearly spending in our industry, there are several headwinds that we're keeping our eye on also that are going to temper that prognosis a bit, some of which are labor costs and healthcare costs are both rising for the operator, and as a result, they've begun to pass menu price increases along to the consumer, and we expect to see more of that in the coming year. As well, on the flip side, food prices are actually been declining at grocery stores. And because of that, consumers now have to decide where to spend their money, and grocery stores have the advantage at the moment. And then finally, the election. And regardless of whatever party that you're supporting, we found that as you get closer to an election, people in general tend to get more cautious with their spending in total, because they're not really clear how the election is going to shake out, and we don't think that this election is going to be any different, and we expect this trend to continue until after the election. So then if we turn our attention and focus on QSR or LSR versus the full-service segment of the industry, our prognosis for LSR is strong. Again, there's a couple of tailwinds helping that. Obviously, the economy and some of the things that I mentioned in terms of declining unemployment, DPI increasing a little bit, are definitely helping this segment. There's also some advantages that QSR or LSR has in general, just with the fact that they've got lower guest checks. And there's been a lot of focus on improved food quality, as well as the habitual nature of just the morning occasion in general continues to support this segment of the industry. However, we are expecting, those headwinds that I talked about in general for the industry in total to impact this segment as well. We're expecting menu prices increases anywhere in the 2 to 3% range, and it's our thought if they get higher than that 3% range, we will start to see consumers walking away. And through a lot of our recent research, we've actually, we've always seen that consumers tend to have a short memory, and that seems to have changed through this recession, and that consumers definitely seem to be much more sensitive today than what they used to be pre-recession. And then the other issue facing this segment, maybe more so than full service, is just the changing work landscape, and the fact that you've got more consumers that are telecommuting these days. And so getting folks out of the house is going to be a big challenge that we've definitely seen has been impacting the lunch occasion at LSR. And so if we switch gears and now talk about the full service side of the industry, our prognosis for this segment is actually that it's going to be weak, and this is really a continuation of what we were seeing before. And while we're seeing there's some positives in the fact that we've seen a pickup in business travel that definitely tends to help full-service restaurants, as well as the increasing number of menu aggregators that are out there. So folks like Grubhub, DoorDash, and Uber Eats, folks like that are really helping a lot of these casual dining operators, whether they're chains or independents, get their food into more people's homes. There really is just the issue of this issue in general that people are still time starved and a lot of people don't want to leave their house. So how are we going to appeal to these folks? And we're seeing kind of retail's answer play out in the fact that you've got folks like Blue Apron and HelloFresh and Amazon Fresh popping up on the scene to accommodate that. So it'll be interesting to see how restaurants start competing. And we've also got the issue with menu prices rising in this segment as well as operators try to cover their costs. But we're reaching the point now where prices are actually getting too high for people to be able to afford to go with the same frequency that they used to. And last year we saw operators run a lot of promotions on some lower cost menu items, specifically sandwiches and burgers, and it wasn't really all that attractive to consumers. So we've seen operators really pull back on some of those promotions that they've been offering to consumers this year relative to last year. So given some of these headwinds, we are anticipating that it's going to be another weak year for the full service segment, unfortunately. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brian, who can give you an update on what's going on at food service at retail.
Thanks, Julie. Again, my name is Brian Darr with Data Central Research, and I'll be taking you through our notes on the retail channel. The retail channel, which covers supermarkets, C-stores, and what we call other retail hosts, accounted for just over $24 billion in operator spend and is estimated to account for about $60 billion in consumer spend. And the total channel is estimated to grow at 3% annually, which is strong and is at a better rate than either the restaurant channel or the on-site channel. So focusing down a little bit on supermarkets, they're estimated to account for nearly $26 billion in consumer spend and estimated to grow at about 3.8% for the year. So what we have seen, and this is a little bit of a repeat of the last couple years, is that many chains are investing more in their prepared foods and bakery departments, as well as the perimeter area in general. There's a lot more excitement around the outside of the store, the outside areas of the store versus the center aisles. And what executives are telling us is that the margins and the growth opportunities are better than what they're seeing in the center aisle categories. And I'll repeat a couple of the things that Julie noted as potential headwinds or things to watch for within the supermarket channel. As these household incomes increase, disposable income increases, and if food deflation continues at the rate that we've seen, just as Julie noted, that creates competition for food, the decision to create or to make meals at home versus going out for lunch or dinner for food away from home. So there is that potential that if food prices continue to drop at grocery stores, more people may look for the option of cooking at home, and it may become more attractive for folks. As Julie noted, people have longer-term memory now, and they can make that switch more readily. The other thing that we've seen over the last few years, mergers and acquisitions definitely are playing a role here, and we'll continue to see that. And a number of chains for the last few years have been adding units and remodeling units. So we may see the pace of this slow a little bit. We're keeping an eye on that. Moving on to the C-store area of the retail channel, they're estimated to account for $31 billion in consumer spend and are estimated to grow at nearly 2.5% for the year. And both last year and this year have been good for C-stores as gas prices have remained fairly low. People are traveling more, and they have more disposable income to spend on their C-store visits. And just as we saw with supermarkets, more chains are adding units within the C-store sector, remodeling units, and we're really starting to see that start to pick up the pace, whereas supermarkets kind of led the way the last few years. We're starting to see the pace pick up with C-stores. However, the thing to note is that independents account for about half of all C-stores, and they tend to be a little bit slower to respond to this. So that's the other part of this to keep an eye on. We have seen more chains that are putting an emphasis on quality ingredients, and since we're seeing that, we're also seeing more consumers who are expanding their consideration set and considering C-stores as an option for food service. And within the C-store segment, we certainly see the snacking occasion and the beverage-only occasion as very strong. And last but not least, within the retail segment, we have what we call the other retail hosts, which are shopping malls, department stores, and mass merchandisers. And as you well know, over the last few years, department stores and malls have certainly been struggling within the last year. Even the mass merchandisers have been struggling a little bit. And so food service has not necessarily been a main focus for them. So we're seeing some activity, but not nearly the activity that we're seeing on the other retail fronts. And this part of the segment accounts for a very small portion of the channel at just over $2 billion in consumer spend. So that's our take on the retail channel. I'm going to turn it over to Katie Chapuis, who's going to take us through the on-site summary.
All righty. Thank you, Brian. As Brian said, my name is Katie. I'll be taking you through on-site. So overall with on-site, we are projecting a 1.8% growth in the next year, average to the industry. I'll start with education. And education is actually a category we're seeing, it's definitely having its struggles in comparison to others. With K through 12, the overarching concern is meeting the nutrition guidelines from the Healthy and Hunger-Free Kids Act, and then in turn dealing with some of the sometimes negative repercussions of meeting those standards. We're only projected a 0.1% growth a week comparison to the industry. But what we're seeing is, meal plan enrollment is down in many cases, but at the same time, food costs are up. We're also seeing free and reduced meal plans on the rise to combat food insecurity among lower income students and neighborhoods. But at the same time, again, that's cutting into revenue and the ability to spend on food programs. So school meal reform is definitely affecting the budgets and operations of these schools, and the shortfalls are likely to continue in the next few years. There are positives, and there are many schools that are able to meet these new guidelines and to thrive under them. We've seen a rise in teaching children about healthy eating, lots of farm-to-school programs and community and school gardens, cooking classes. But overall, the segment is definitely facing some uphill challenges. Similarly to colleges and universities, which we've also projected at 0.7% weak in comparison. What's happening in CNU is we're seeing a rise in the cost of tuition and room and board, which is making it difficult for some families to afford college. And that is increasing the competition for more non-traditional units such as community colleges and college programs that don't require students to live on campus. On the flip side, we're also seeing the cost of meal plans rising at institutions so they can cover the cost for the often requested healthier and more diverse and sort of trend-forward food options. What's positive at CNU is their retail programs. So services like C-stores and co-ops and even a rise in food pantries are happening. But overall, retail is definitely the bright spot on campus dining. With that said, I know I just spoke a lot of negative about the segment, but there's definitely a portion within this segment that is really thriving and really able to offer very innovative food choices to their students and provide a very high-quality meal plan reflecting the latest trends to the point that it's often used as a marketing tool to attract future students. Moving on to B&I. B&I is definitely reflective of the health of the economy as a whole. We have them at 1.5% projected growth, average to the industry. But as unemployment continues to decline or be steady, and as with job growth, if the job market is stable, B&I is likely to remain stable as well. Many employers still use food programs as an incentive to attract and keep their employees. And recently we've also noted a shift. It's small, but it's sort of noteworthy that there are some companies, particularly larger tech or startups, that are starting to bring their entire food service operation in-house and away from contract managed firms. And this just sort of further reflects that desire for companies to really be able to cultivate their brand and company culture, even down to the type of food they're offering. And that's all sort of in the chance to entice and keep more current and future employees. Also within B&I, micro markets are doing really well. We'll touch on that a little bit further in vending. But micro markets are thriving in B&I, especially among smaller and mid-sized offices, where their convenience and efficiency is just a real selling point to smaller operators. Next, we will move on to travel and leisure. So we've got them at 2.6%, strong in comparison to the industry. Again, very reflective of the economy. As the economy gets stronger and stable, people are more willing to spend money on leisurely activities and to travel. There's only a slight negative in the health of our economy, and that's that our dollar is so strong right now that it's actually putting off international tourism. However, our domestic tourism is so strong that we're seeing domestic travel and tourism offset most of any of the negative effects of decreasing international spending. Within recreation, we're seeing places like national parks and campgrounds have a very large increase in visitors. Sports stadiums and amusement parks are doing very well. Food service revenues definitely went up in the past year, and we've seen a lot of that. Stadiums are now pairing oftentimes with local celebrity chefs or a favorite local chain, and really just putting that extra effort into making food a bigger part of the whole experience when they're out at these games and whatnot. On to lodging. We also have that as strong at 2.7. Again, very reflective of the economic health. What we are seeing is that where international tourism is big, so places like New York and San Francisco are definitely feeling slight effects from the decrease in international visitors. However, again, though, domestic business and leisure travel is doing so well that it's not enough to really dampen our outlook in the coming years. And for example, the beige books, the federal beige books, note that operations are booked throughout the summer and the holiday season, which is a pretty good indication of what the upcoming year will be. The other thing to note for lodging that will be interesting to see how it's affected is the rise of Airbnb. Again, larger tourist cities are already starting to feel an increase in competition, and we expect that that's likely to continue in the years to come. Moving on to transportation, we have that at 1.7% projected growth, average to the industry. The main story within transportation are airlines, and airlines over the past few years have gone through mergers and are seeing huge revenues because of that. And with those revenues, they're now slowly starting to invest more of that money into improving customer experiences. So you're seeing, more free food on flights, improved airline lounges, and just in general a heightened food and beverage experience. So that is travel and leisure. And then moving on to the healthcare segment. So healthcare we have at 2.1%, strong in comparison to the rest of the industry. The largest thing to note about healthcare, when we say it's strong growth, we're really talking more a reflection of volume. It's not necessarily a growth in revenue, but more that the entire segment is larger due to ACA and more people being covered by insurance these days. So within hospitals, hospitals are now paid based on customer and patient satisfaction. So they're investing more in improving their food service options, whether it's in the quality of the ingredients or the service style, whether it's a la carte or whatnot. And in doing so, will hopefully improve patient satisfaction, which will then thusly lead to an increase in revenue for insurance payouts. So the increase in food costs that we are seeing is a reflection in the shift of purchasing and food service operations with the long-term goal of higher payouts and revenues. We're also seeing a lower bed count and admission count, but that's due because now there's really more of a shift towards outpatient care whenever possible in an effort for hospitals to sort of keep costs down a little bit. Moving on to long-term care, we have that at 1.5% projected growth average. The key factors here is that the number of individuals over 65 are expected to continue to grow at a rate of about 3% for the next 5 years. Within that, people are also living longer, and the disposable income levels for the baby boomer generation and older individuals is likely to increase over that same period as well. And that is going to afford people not only better care, but also more choices in the type of care they receive. So as you see hospitals continue to reduce their length of patient stays, there's going to be more demand for long-term care facilities for rehabilitative needs and whatnot. The other thing we're seeing within long-term care is there's been a surge of coverage expansion that began in 2014, and that's beginning to slow. So it appears that growth is tapering, but we'd just like to say it's stabilizing, not tapering. It's not going to decline. It's just going to sort of level off as the amount of insured and people who are covered sort of levels off a bit. Moving on to senior living, the biggest thing here is that, as I mentioned with long-term care, as people have more choice and are sort of remaining more active longer and have more money, they're actually leaning more towards staying home whenever possible rather than entering senior living communities. There's going to be demand. Demand will persist as the population increases, but the combination of the stronger economy and sort of the healthier elderly population is definitely slowing senior living as compared to long-term care. So because of this, you're really seeing operators making a significant effort to enhance the variety of their health and entertainment options and food, and that also includes improving the food service that they offer, whether it's through improved ingredients or different dining styles and whatnot. Food service is being used as a way to potentially increase residents long-term. And then just briefly to cover other, it's a slightly smaller portion. We've got vending first, overall other. The other segment has a 1.2% projected growth week, but that's largely due to military and corrections. So briefly, vending, I mentioned before, we have at 1.4% average. There will be a persistent competition for vending with snacks brought from home or snacks bought in bulk from dollar stores or club stores. So that's always going to be the constant source of competition. But in general, operators are investing in new machines, technologies, and hopefully technology and innovations that will streamline facility operations and increase long-term profits. The bright spot in vending, as mentioned before, is definitely micro markets. It's definitely leading the segment and any growth that's happening, and kind of looked at within vending as the next big thing. On to catering, we have projected a 1.7% growth average to the industry. Again, very reflective of the economy. So as businesses large and small and individuals feel confident in their disposable income, they're likely to continue to use catering facilities. There's definitely also a more food knowledgeable client, and so demand for on-trend offerings and things reminiscent of restaurant style will definitely persist. Also within catering, there are a lot of segments that are upping their own catering programs like C&U or supermarkets and restaurants. So traditional caterers are definitely going to feel an increase in competition from these other segments. And then very briefly, military, we've got contracting -1% and marked as weak. And that's largely due in part to just the overall contraction of the U.S. military in general. Deployments have been down and are likely to continue to decline. There are efforts being made to offer more healthy options, but it's not necessarily raising budgets or raising profits, but there is been a slight effort these days for healthier food at military mess halls. And in some instances, bases may opt to make mess hall utilization mandatory, and that's likely to create a stable revenue to sort of help them in changing their food offerings. But overall contraction is likely to continue. And then for corrections, Again, the largest reason for the contraction is due to a declining prison population. It's a very slight decline, but that paired with the budgetary issues faced by many states is ultimately leading to a lack of funding and what will keep the industry, or the segment rather, from growing. And so that brings us to the total food service industry, which we have growing at about 1.9% for the next year, and that covers it. That's on-site. Do we have any other questions?
Katie, thank you so much, and Brian and Julie as well. Thank you for providing your input and sharing, kind of what you guys see as kind of outlook for all of these different food service segments. Because this is being recorded, we can't take questions live, but if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, julie@ifmaworld.com, and I will redirect if necessary. Otherwise, we also have a great resource that might be of interest to any of our members. It's available on our website, and it is the Food Service Insights Library. This provides a deeper look at each one of these food service segments, as well as some top distribution players, a look at GPOs and food service management companies as well.